Welcome to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show with Corey and Justin. Here they are, the Fourth and Long Fantasy Brothers.
Welcome to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. My name is Corey, and I am here with my actual brother, Justin.
Hi, this is Justin.
All right, Justin, we got a lot of content to go over today because it is our first half of our Car Ride to Maine segment where we talk about MVPs, LVPs, and sleepers. So with that said, let's get to it.
On today's show.
All right, so on today's show, we're going to be doing our segment called Car Ride to Maine. Now, this is a segment that Justin and I created long before we started up this show. It was something that we did because for 2 consecutive NFL off seasons, we found our way going up towards Maine to see some extended family. And on that long car trip, we ended up playing this little game where we named the MVPs, LVPs, and sleepers for each team. MVP is their most valuable fantasy player. This is going to be the player who is going to exceed or meet their lofty fantasy expectations. The LVP is the player who is not going to return on the expectations that the consensus of fantasy experts might have for them. And a sleeper is a player who is going to outperform their current rank, whether it's someone way, way down in the consensus rankings or it's someone who is relevant but isn't relevant enough. Justin, what do you think? You ready for some Car Ride to Maine?
This is one of my favorite segments that we do, Corey, in the offseason. Today, we're going to start with AFC. Next week, we'll do NFC. Corey, why don't you get us started with the AFC West?
Right. We're going to go division by division here. I'm going to start off in the West, and I'm going to start off with the AFC champion, the Kansas City Chiefs. This is a lot of content, so these are going to be really quick takes. Let's get things started with their MVP. I'm going to go with Travis Kelce. Barring injury, I feel like he's probably the absolute safest bet in all of fantasy football. My LVP, my least valuable fantasy player for the Kansas City Chiefs, is going to be Mecole Hardman. I'm surprised now that for 3 years, we're just not getting the message because he still has some fantasy value. He's not going super high, but still in that wide receiver range where he's going to be drafted. I just don't want to get burned by him again. I don't think he's anything too special now. And finally, my sleeper is going to be Darrell Williams. Now, for some reason, he's going well below all the other committee and handcuff backs that are out there. I'll have a lot of Darrell Williams this year as he's the RB60 right now in consensus rankings.
I like all the takes, Corey. I think Hardman, right? We've been waiting for that breakout. He was one of my sleeper breakout guys last year. Did not happen. I think it's a good call. I think people that are hoping for it to happen will be a bit disappointed. I totally get it. Why don't you move into, Corey, the Las Vegas Raiders?
All right, next up we have the Raiders. I'm going to go with the MVP being Josh Jacobs. Now, this may be a surprise, but I feel like he's one of the many proven running backs who are out there who's been overcorrected in the market because of a move this offseason. I think RB1 potential is still very much in his sights. The LVP is going to be John Brown. Now, he's not a highly ranked wide receiver, but he is the highest ranked Raider wide receiver in half-point PPR and fantasy consensus. That's surprising to me. It's kind of odd to me. I like the others, especially my sleeper. And my sleeper is going to be Bryan Edwards, wide receiver in Las Vegas. He's my absolute favorite dart throw this year at receiver. He's got an impressive profile coming off of an injury. I hope he stays under the radar because I want him at wide receiver 81.
Corey, I like all the calls there. I think another good sleeper on the Raiders would be Henry Ruggs, the second-year wideout. I like the calls. Move into the Chargers.
All right, Justin, Chargers should be easy for me. My MVP is going to be Justin Herbert, who you know I just absolutely love. I think talent-wise, there's no reason to believe he won't be a top 5 quarterback at this time next year. My LVP, no surprise, is going to be Austin Eckler. Get a listen to our bus video from last week. You'll hear exactly what I think about Eckler. He's so expensive right now for a glorified pass-catching back. And my sleeper is going to be Joshua Kelly. Now, this is going to definitely hinge on the fact that I'm not a big fan of Eckler, but he flashed at times in his rookie year. And I can see a scenario where Kelly has some major goal line usage this year.
Corey, I like all those calls there. We're both low on Eckler. Another sleeper I'll mention for the Chargers, potentially Mike Williams this year, but I like all your calls. Corey, another offense looking young, looking pretty high flying here. The Broncos. Talk to me about them.
Yeah, so the Broncos are going to be another situation where it's pretty easy for me and should be pretty clear with how I've laid out my stuff in film review episodes and stuff like that in the past. My MVP, my most valuable fantasy player on the Broncos, is going to be Courtland Sutton. I think Courtland Sutton is the next A.J. Green waiting to happen. He's coming off an injury, which obviously makes him a risky take. But if you remember, so was Allen Robinson a few years back coming off of the same exact injury. My LVP is going to be Javonte Williams. Now, Justin, before you get after me here, I really like this guy, and I think he's the future of the Broncos running backs. But we all see a trend where he's being taken over Melvin Gordon, and I don't think that's a smart move in redraft. Finally, my sleeper is going to be another wide receiver in the system, and that's Jerry Jeudy. Now, it's hard to call Jeudy a sleeper this year, but I'm expecting a second-year leap where he's being considered as a low-end wide receiver 2 next year at this time.
Corey, I totally get the take on Williams, right? I'm not going to jump at you there for that one. It's a redraft discussion here, right? I see Williams obviously being the better play in dynasty settings, right? Keeper settings, but totally get it. ADP's a little high. Melvin Gordon will still have a role. People that are investing in Javonte Williams may not be totally happy with what they get in return. Totally get it.
And it's going to continue to trend that way, Justin, as the offseason goes on. That rookie hype gets a little too high. Now let's move forward to the AFC South here, Justin. You have the Titans right now. What do you think about the Titans?
Yeah, so I'm going to get started here with the Tennessee Titans. My MVP for the Tennessee Titans is going to be A.J. Brown, the third-year wideout here. Now, I was down on him, Corey, in 2020, and that was definitely not a good call on my end. He's special, right? And I think the integration of Julio Jones into this offense is going to open things up, for A.J. Brown. I think he still has that wide receiver 1 overall upside. My LVP is going to be, and this is a byproduct of the integration of Julio Jones onto this team, is Josh Reynolds. His value totally evaporated when Julio Jones was brought in, and anyone who was taking a late run flyer on him is going to need to move on at this point. And then my sleeper to wrap up the Titans here is going to be actually quarterback Ryan Tannehill. Now, the weapons for Tennessee are great. They really are this year. And Ryan Tannehill's been a pretty good fantasy quarterback when A.J. Brown's been on the field. He's currently around that quarterback 12 range, and I think he could offer top 8 upside this year.
Justin, there's still something about Tennessee that scares me where they just have to be so efficient to work well. I get it. I'm someone who, has not jumped on the train, but I'm still a little nervous with Tennessee. Why don't we move on to Indy and talk about the Colts?
Yeah, Indianapolis Colts here. The MVP, I'm going to go with the easy call for this team, and it's going to be second-year running back Jonathan Taylor. He's just too talented not to have as my Colts MVP. Now, Hines and Mack will be involved, right? But this is a good football team with a great offensive line. And I think Taylor is a surefire top 10 running back this year. My LVP is going to be aging wide receiver T.Y. Hilton. I think we see steps forward for guys like Michael Pittman and Paris Campbell. And listen, I totally think that T.Y. Hilton will have his games. He certainly will. But I'm going to take the younger players with more upside here. And that actually curtails nicely into my sleeper here. And I'm going to go with wide receiver Paris Campbell as my sleeper for the Colts. Now, hear me out, Corey, right? Because health is going to be key with Paris Campbell. He's not been able to stay healthy. But I like the idea of Campbell being an 80 to 90 catch guy and have that 1,000-yard receiving sort of upside in this offense. And he's a value right now, and he could return back in wide receiver 2 value when all is said and done.
Justin, the one thing I will say here about T.Y. Hilton is that I think he still has some value. We didn't see a lot of bad out of him last year. It was mostly from Phillip Rivers throwing him duds. So I still think T.Y. Hilton is the guy to own, but I appreciate those takes. All right, let's move on to Houston, Justin, and talk about the Texans, a team that you and I both don't think has a ton of fantasy value, but where is the value going to be with Houston this year?
This was tough to do, man. When I was looking at the Texans offense this year, it was really difficult to pick out an MVP and a sleeper here. But I'm going to go with I think what the obvious choice will be for most people, and that's going to be Brandon Cooks is the MVP. He's the only real piece of this offense that I really want any part of. I think Cooks will offer low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 sort of production week in and week out. And I think if Watson does end up playing this year, I think you might raise that up to a more of a mid-range wide receiver 2. My LVP is going to be, I'm just going to go with the entire running back room here, right? It's definitely messy. We talked a lot about this on our bust episode last week, where we talked about David Johnson being a bust for the 2021 season. DJ, Lindsey, Ingram, and Burkhead should create a frustrating RBBC here for Houston. And then my sleeper is going to be contingent on the fact that Deshaun Watson does not play this year, and I'm going to go with Tyrod Taylor. This was really tough, right, to pick out who the sleeper would be on this offense, because I don't really like the prospects of a guy like Randall Cobb or Kiki Cutie or Jordan Akins, right? So I just went with the guy that could provide some value in quarterback, heavy leagues, right, in 2 quarterback leagues, super flex leagues. And if Watson doesn't play, I think Tyrod could offer some low-end QB1 numbers here and there, especially with how much he may have to throw with how terrible that defense looks this year.
The more things change, the more things seem to stay the same. Another year down and another year of Justin talking up Tyrod Taylor again. Justin, let's move forward and talk about the last team we're going to talk about in this division, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Jaguars were interesting to scout out here and come up with these 3 buckets. I'm going to start with my MVP, and that's going to be wide receiver DJ Chark. Now, I think Trevor Lawrence, right, the rookie quarterback here, is going to certainly lock onto somebody. And I think that Chark right now is the most talented wide receiver in that room. Reports are that he's, beefed up. He's added some pounds to his frame this offseason to kind of take on that alpha role, right? Urban Meyer's challenged him to become that true alpha number 1 wide receiver. I like the shot at him being a top 15 wide receiver this year, and his current ECR is actually wide receiver 30. I think he could well outperform that. My LVP is going to be another wide receiver, and that's going to be Laviska Shenault. This is because I really like Marvin Jones as the number 2 wideout in this offense over Shenault. In addition to that, I think ETN is going to play a really big role in this passing offense, and I think that's going to have a negative effect on the ability for Shenault to take that next step in his second season. And then finally, my sleeper, I'm going to go with the rookie quarterback, Trevor Lawrence here. And I think it's all because I think that people are underrating his rushing ability. Now, in our pre-draft video, Corey, I talked a lot about how pro-ready Lawrence is, right? How he's one of those sort of generational quarterback prospect talents that we haven't really seen since Andrew Luck came into the NFL. And I think he could offer some sneaky top 10 upside at the position in his rookie season.
Justin, I'll say right here, the Jaguars, I agree with every single take. Chark is the one, Laviska being overdrafted. Trevor Lawrence is a nice QB to grab if you're going to grab a quarterback late.
The Jags were a fun team to scout, Corey. Really, this whole division was a fun division to scout. Let's keep moving, though. Let's go into the AFC North. Let's start with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Right, so my fantasy MVP for the Steelers is actually going to be, and I was between 2 here. I didn't go with Najee. I instead went Deontay Johnson. Now, I see too much good to be distracted by the noise and the drops from last year. He's a great all-around wide receiver who will take a leap this year in my mind. My LVP is going to be a guy who I was cautioning against last year, and I'm going to do it again, and that's Juju Smith-Schuster. This year marks the final nail in the coffin that proves that Juju is just a solid secondary receiver on his own team, nothing more. And finally, my sleeper is going to be Roethlisberger. Now, someone in your league, I guarantee it, will be starting him in week 6, and he's most likely not even being considered in drafts. That's my feeling on the Steelers.
Like all the calls, Corey, don't disagree with any of them. Let's keep moving to the Baltimore Ravens.
Right, so my Ravens MVP is going to be Lamar Jackson. Not a lot to talk about here. I had Lamar as my QB3 last year, and it was considered too bold. But, that's what the market does. I will say I do think he should be considered a great starting fantasy quarterback this year. My LVP is actually going to be, and I was surprised by this, but J.K. Dobbins. Now, I'm starting to worry about Dobbins a little bit here. He's a metric darling, but as the RB16, that's a steep price for me, and I'm a little worried he won't be able to return that RB2 value. Now, my sleeper in this offense is going to be, once again, I was thinking maybe Gus Edwards here, but I'm going to go with Hollywood Brown, Marquise Hollywood Brown. I'm ready to be hurt again, Justin. He's a Deshaun Jackson-worthy wide receiver 2 on a fantasy team that's set at every other fantasy position. So if you have a team that's well-rounded and you need a wide receiver 2 who's going to be boom or bust, Hollywood's a good way to look in my mind.
Don't hate any of the calls here, Corey. I think Dobbins as the LVP is a bold take, but probably the right call here, especially with how involved I think Gus Edwards will be. Dobbins is being drafted as a bell cow running back. I totally hear that. Let's keep moving, Corey, to the Cleveland Browns. Who do you got?
So my MVP, Justin, is going to be Nick Chubb. This will be the last time, mark my words, that Nick Chubb is not going to be a top 5 fantasy drafted running back for the foreseeable future. My LVP is going to be OBJ. I'm finally over it, Justin. I'm done with OBJ. My heart's been broken too many times by his inconsistency, which means that my sleeper is going to be Jarvis Landry. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I'm not super confident in that. But I guess if OBJ will completely fall, Landry should surely rise, right?
Yeah, there's not a lot to love in this passing offense. It certainly runs through the running game. Chubb and Kareem Hunt will offer some pretty solid value week in and week out. Totally agree. Let's wrap things up, Corey, with the young offense here, Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, my MVP for the Bengals is going to be a guy that you and I both like, Justin, and that's Joe Mixon. You could call us Joe Mixon truthers for sure. Now, there's a reason why he's adored by a lot of people in the fantasy community, and it's because he's talented. Now, he's hurt so many in the past, and this may be the year that he makes his truthers proud at a nice value. My LVP is going to be T. Higgins. This is going to be sort of calling back to our bust video from last week as well. I don't understand the low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 appeal here. He's currently going in that wide receiver 26 range. I don't see how the veteran Boyd is going to go away, and I don't see Chase's star fading anytime soon. That rookie's going to really perform this year. And my sleeper is actually going to be Joe Burrow. Now, Joe was on a really nice pace for fantasy purposes in the season before his injury came up. This year, I'm going to pair him up with another risky quarterback and bet that Burrow actually becomes a top 7 quarterback.
Or you and I have been Mixon truthers since he came into the NFL, being drafted at Oklahoma. The guy's just a special talent at the running back position. I think this year is the year where everything comes together for Joe Mixon. He's that bell cow workload sort of running back, and we could see a top 5 finish to the season for Joe Mixon. I like the call.
All right, Justin, we've made it. Last division, and it's going to be the AFC East. You get the fantasy crown jewel as we know it. Why don't you get things started with the actual fantasy relevant Buffalo Bills?
Yeah, the Buffalo Bills have an exciting offense here. It was pretty easy to pick the MVP, and it's going to be Stephon Diggs, man. Enough said. The guy is he's a special talent at the wide receiver position. Could be the wide receiver one overall this year if the touchdown luck goes in his favor. My LVP is going to be running back Devin Singletary. Now, if the end of last year is a signal of things to come, I think we see Zach Moss take on an expanded role in the offense this year in year 2, which really leaves Singletary as the odd man out and could only see Singletary, getting a handful of touches in his 3rd season. There was actually a report that came out today as we were recording after I put my notes together that said that Zach Moss is really emerging as the clear goal line and lead back here in this offense. And that makes him my sleeper this year, Corey, for the Buffalo Bills. I'm expecting a 2nd-year jump for this guy Moss. And, obviously the goal line attempts will get vultured here and there by Josh Allen, but I think Moss is a great late-round running back. The value you could get out of him right now, you could see him go for potentially 1,000 yards on the ground and, maybe 8 touchdowns, very similar to a guy like Damian Harris, who we'll talk about in just a few minutes.
Justin, this situation seems like it could be something to me that gets way out of control in the preseason where Zach Moss gets bumped up too much that I'm actually liking Devin Singletary's value. Let's move forward to the Dolphins. There's some appealing fantasy candidates here, Justin. What do you think about Miami?
Yeah, my MVP for the Dolphins is going to be wide receiver Will Fuller. Now, caveat, right, he's going to miss the first game, but he is the most talented wide receiver, I think, in this wide receiver room at this point. I think Tua takes the next step, and, Fuller is going to be one of the main beneficiaries of that next step that Tua takes. Now, we've seen Will Fuller be really good for fantasy football with Deshaun Watson, and if he stays healthy, which I know is a big if with Will Fuller, he could offer some serious upside, some serious value right now. He's currently ranked as the expert consensus rank wide receiver 34. I think he could well outperform that. My LVP is going to be running back Myles Gaskin. We talked a lot about Gaskin on our bust episode last week, Corey. People that are valuing Gaskin as an RB2, I think we're going to be disappointed this year between Malcolm Brown, right? Ahmed still being there. The Dolphins' actions recently we talked a lot about, right? Nearly drafting Javonte Williams, almost claiming Kerryon Johnson. I don't know they're totally sold on Gaskin being their main guy. If you guys want to hear a more in-depth take on Gaskin, go back and listen to our bust episode from last week. And then my sleeper for the Dolphins is actually going to be Tua Tagovailoa, the quarterback. It was only a few years ago, Corey, that Tua was being really heralded as one of the next great NFL quarterbacks, right? Coming out of Bama, those special seasons he had. You don't just lose that talent, right? And I think that he takes a big step with the offensive weapons and the additions they've made through free agency and through the draft here. He could become a weekly start at the quarterback position this year.
Some nice calls there, Justin. I'm going to full-heartedly agree with that Myles Gaskin take. I think this is a really ripe fantasy opportunity here where you can possibly get some great value either out of Malcolm Brown or Ahmed. All right, so Justin, we've got 2 left. Next up is the New England Patriots. This can be a little bit of fantasy confusion here. Can you clear things up for us on how things are going to look for the Patriots?
Yeah, it's difficult to kind of project what the Patriots offense is going to look like this year, but I'm going to make the call here that I think the MVP for the Patriots offense in terms of fantasy production is going to be tight end Jonnu Smith. I think that short area passes this year are really going to be the kind of the bread and butter, right? I think they're going to be plentiful in this New England offense. I think if we learned anything last year from watching Cam Newton in this offense, especially as the year progressed, it's that he cannot throw the deep ball anymore. Belichick went out, sought after this guy, Jonnu Smith. I think that the short area targets are going to be going all to him. And I think he could finish as a top 10 tight end when he's kind of being all but forgotten right now at the position. Now, my LVP is going to be, I'm going to go with an entire room here, and it's going to be the wide receiver room, right? Nelson Aguilar, Jacoby Myers, Kendrick Bourne, N'Keal Harry, right, if he's still on the team. I just see this passing offense running through the tight ends and Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, as well as the running back James White. I don't think there's going to be enough volume to justify starting any of these Patriot wide receivers this season. And then my sleeper is actually going to be a guy that we talked about back on my ranks episode a couple weeks ago, Corey, and that's running back Damian Harris. Now, I think it's clear that Damian Harris is going to open the season as the lead back in this New England offense, and I think he's the running back to own in this backfield. I'm not saying it's going to be pretty, right? I'm not saying that he's going to offer consistent RB2 sort of upside. He certainly could, but I don't think it's going to happen necessarily all the time. But I think he should provide a steady running back 3 flex sort of floor, and he'll sprinkle in those handful of RB2 weeks, right, where he scores a couple touchdowns. And the best thing about it is he's cheap right now.
Justin, Damian Harris could really be one of those guys where if you're going to build your team around a strong wide receiver room or maybe grab a tight end early, he could be a really fun RB2 to have on your roster and be a nice surprise. Last but certainly not least, we have the New York Jets, Justin. What are things going to look like, Justin? Is there any fantasy value in New York this year?
Yeah, we're going to end on a bang here, right, with the New York Jets offense. It was difficult, I'm not going to lie, to kind of project who I thought was going to be the MVP of this team. But I'm going to go with who I think has probably the highest upside and the most unknown on this team, and that's going to be the rookie running back, Michael Carter. I think he could take over as the clear lead back here in New York. He's a talented pass catcher, right? That's what he was known for coming out of North Carolina. He could flirt with weekly running back 2 value, especially in PPR leagues. My LVP is going to be second-year wide receiver Denzel Mims. Corey Davis, Elijah Moore have all been brought in, right? You've got Jamison Crowder, who's come back and restructured his contract to stay with the Jets. I just don't see Mims offering anything of value this year. He may not even see the field, right? If Davis, Crowder, and Moore take those 3 wide receiver roles. And then my sleeper is actually going to be Jamison Crowder, the wide receiver. I think he'll act as that over-the-middle, right slot, safety blanket target for the rookie quarterback, Zach Wilson. I think he could be a rock-solid wide receiver 3, especially in PPR leagues. He's currently ranked as ECR wide receiver 62, so that's pretty far down there. You're talking last pick of your draft territory. I think he could well outperform that rank, and I think 80 catches and maybe 800 yards are well within reach.
So NFC still to go, Justin. AFC down. We have done our car ride to Maine segment for the AFC. And with that said, please make sure that if you listen to us where you can find podcasts, make sure to download. And on our YouTube site, please make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, do whatever you can to show some support, and definitely make sure to subscribe. My name is Corey.
And I'm Justin.
And this has been the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. We'll see you next time.
Royalty-free music courtesy of Ben Sound. The views and opinions expressed on today's episode are that of the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. Remember to like and subscribe.